The old pickup truck rattled down Maple Street as Marcus Johnson gripped the steering wheel with nervous hands, stealing glances at the small girl sitting silently in the passenger seat. Sarah Williams was only 7 years old, but her dark eyes held the weight of someone who had seen too much pain for her age. The social worker had warned Marcus that Sarah hadn't spoken a single word in 3 weeks, not since her last foster family had given up on her, claiming she was too difficult to handle. Marcus pulled into the driveway of his modest 2-bedroom house and turned off the engine, the sudden silence making his heart pound louder. "Well, Sarah," he said gently, "this is home now." The little girl clutched a torn stuffed rabbit against her chest and followed him to the front door without making a sound. Marcus had spent the last 2 weeks transforming his spare room into something magical, working late into the night after his shifts at the auto shop. He had painted the walls a soft pink color, even though he had never painted anything in his life, and the uneven brushstrokes showed his amateur attempts. He had found a small bed at a garage sale and spent hours sanding and repainting it white, adding princess stickers he had bought from the dollar store. The curtains were mismatched. One set had flowers, while the other had butterflies, but he thought they looked cheerful together. When Sarah saw her new room, her eyes widened slightly, and Marcus caught the faintest hint of surprise on her face. "Do you like it?" he asked hopefully, but she just stood in the doorway, still holding her rabbit. That night, Marcus made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, remembering how his own mother used to make them when he was scared or sad. Sarah ate slowly, her eyes never leaving her plate, while Marcus tried to fill the silence with gentle stories about his work at the shop and the funny things his customers would say. Before bedtime, Marcus pulled out a book he had borrowed from the library, Charlotte's Web, and began reading aloud even though Sarah showed no interest. He read chapter after chapter, his deep voice filling the quiet house, and though Sarah never responded, he noticed she had stopped fidgeting and seemed to be listening. Days turned into weeks, and Marcus established routines that slowly began to chip away at the walls Sarah had built around herself. Every morning, he would make her breakfast and pack her lunch with a little note that said things like, "Have a great day," or "You're braver than you know." At first, Sarah would throw the notes away, but Marcus never stopped including them. He would walk her to school each morning, pointing out interesting things along the way, like the neighbor's cat, who always sat in the same window, or the old oak tree that changed colors with the seasons. After school, Sarah would find Marcus waiting for her with a snack and a warm smile, ready to hear about her day, even though she never shared anything. One afternoon, Marcus noticed Sarah watching the other children in dance class through the community center window, her face pressed against the glass with longing. The next day, he approached Mrs. Peterson, the dance teacher, and asked about enrollment costs. When he learned that the classes cost $60 a month, Marcus's heart sank because that was almost a full day's wages for him. But that evening, he called his boss and asked for extra weekend shifts, explaining that his daughter wanted to take dance lessons. Mrs. Peterson was surprised when Marcus showed up the following Monday with Sarah and the enrollment fee in cash, mostly in small bills and quarters he had been saving. Sarah's first dance class was magical, in a way Marcus had never expected. She was hesitant at first, standing in the back of the room while other children moved freely to the music. But gradually, something awakened in her, and she began to copy the simple movements the teacher demonstrated. Marcus watched from the hallway, his work clothes still smelling of motor oil, and felt tears in his eyes when Sarah smiled for the first time since coming to live with him. The breakthrough came during Sarah's first recital 2 months later. Marcus had worked extra hours to afford the costume, a simple pink tutu that made Sarah look like a real ballerina. He sat in the back row of the small auditorium, surrounded by other parents who looked much more polished than he did in his best shirt and tie. When Sarah appeared on stage, she searched the audience until her eyes found his, and for the first time, she waved at him. After her performance, She ran straight to him, her face glowing with pride and excitement. "Did you see me dance, Daddy Marcus?" she asked, the first full sentence she had spoken since arriving at his house. Marcus knelt down and hugged her tightly, his voice thick with emotion as he said, "You were the most beautiful dancer up there, sweetheart." From that moment, their bond grew stronger each day, built on small gestures of love and trust that neither of them had experienced before. Marcus would attend every school event, cheering louder than any other parent when Sarah received awards or performed in school plays. He learned to braid her hair by watching YouTube videos, and though his attempts were clumsy at first, Sarah never complained about the lopsided braids or the tangles he couldn't quite smooth out. Their neighbors began to notice the transformation. In both of them, Marcus seemed lighter and more purposeful, while Sarah blossomed into a confident, happy child who would wave at everyone from their front porch. On Sarah's 8th birthday, Marcus had saved 4 months to buy her something special. But instead of an expensive gift, he decided to give her something that would last forever. He spent the evening before her birthday baking a chocolate cake from scratch, though he had never baked anything more complicated than toast. The cake was lopsided and the frosting was uneven, but he wrote "Happy Birthday, Sarah" in pink letters and added 8 candles. The next morning, he woke Sarah with breakfast in bed and the promise of a special surprise after school. When she came home that afternoon, she found their small living room decorated with streamers and balloons, and Marcus sitting at their kitchen table with the homemade cake and a small wrapped box. Inside the box was a simple silver ring with her birthstone, far too big for her small finger, but perfect for wearing on a chain around her neck. "This is a promise ring," Marcus explained, his voice serious but warm. "It means that no matter what happens in life, no matter how far apart we might be, you will always be my daughter, and I will always be your dad." Sarah threw her arms around his neck and whispered, "I love you, Daddy," words that Marcus would treasure for the rest of his life, never knowing how much he would need to remember them in the years to come. 10 years had passed since that magical 8th birthday, and Sarah Williams now stood at 18 in her graduation gown. But the young woman looking back at Marcus from the school auditorium bore little resemblance to the grateful child who had once called him Daddy with such love. Sarah had grown tall and beautiful, her dark hair styled perfectly, and her makeup applied with the skill of someone who had learned to present herself to the world with calculated precision. She was valedictorian of her class, heading to Stanford University on a full academic scholarship, and everyone in their small town spoke of her success with admiration and pride. Yet, as Marcus watched her deliver her graduation speech from his seat in the middle row, wearing his best suit that was now 10 years old and slightly too tight, he felt a cold distance that had been growing between them for months. Sarah's speech was brilliant and polished, full of big words about reaching for dreams and breaking barriers, but when her eyes swept across the audience, they seemed to skip right over him as if he were invisible. After the ceremony, Marcus waited patiently by his old pickup truck while Sarah posed for pictures with her classmates and their families, most of whom drove expensive cars and wore designer clothes that cost more than Marcus made in a month. When Sarah finally approached him, she was walking with her boyfriend Bradley, a tall boy with perfectly styled hair, whose father owned the largest law firm in the county. "Marcus," Sarah said, using his first name instead of Dad, a change that had started 6 months earlier. "This is Bradley Henderson." "Bradley, this is Marcus, the man who raised me." The way she said "the man who raised me" instead of "my father" cut through Marcus's heart like a knife. But he extended his hand with a warm smile and said, "Nice to meet you, Bradley. I've heard a lot about you." Bradley's handshake was weak and brief, and he looked at Marcus's work-stained fingernails and calloused palms with barely concealed disgust before turning back to Sarah and saying, "We should go, babe. My parents are waiting at the country club." Sarah nodded quickly and gave Marcus a hurried hug that felt more like an obligation than affection. "I'll see you at home later," she said, but her tone suggested she would rather be anywhere else. Marcus spent that evening alone in their small house, looking at photo albums filled with pictures of Sarah's childhood, her first dance recital, Christmas mornings, school plays where he had cheered from the audience, camping trips where they had roasted marshmallows and told stories under the stars. He wondered when everything had started to change, when his little girl who used to run to him with scraped knees and broken toys had become this polished stranger who seemed embarrassed by his very existence. The answer had come gradually, he realized, starting when Sarah entered high school and began spending time with wealthy classmates who lived in the expensive part of town. She had started asking for designer clothes and electronics, claiming she needed them to fit in with her new friends. Marcus had worked double shifts and taken on weekend jobs to give her everything she asked for, selling his beloved vintage Mustang that he had spent years restoring to buy Sarah a laptop for her college applications. When Sarah's friends came to their house, which happened less and less frequently, Marcus noticed how she would rush them past the living room with its second-hand furniture and faded carpet, taking them straight to her bedroom and closing the door. He had overheard her telling one friend that Marcus was just a family friend who was helping her out, never mentioning that he was her adoptive father who had raised her since she was 7. The night before Sarah left for college, Marcus sat her down at their kitchen table with a cup of hot chocolate, just like they used to do when she was little, and had something important to discuss. "Sarah," he began carefully, "I know you're excited about starting this new chapter of your life, and I'm proud of everything you've accomplished. But I want you to know that no matter how successful you become, or how far you travel, this will always be your home, and I will always be here for you." Sarah looked uncomfortable and avoided his eyes, fidgeting with her phone instead of responding to his heartfelt words. "I know you think I don't understand the world you're moving into," Marcus continued, "but I want you to remember the values we've talked about over the years: kindness, honesty, gratitude for what we have." At this, Sarah's expression hardened, and she looked up at him with an anger that shocked him. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice sharp and cold. "I'm going to Stanford, Marcus. I'm going to make something of myself. I can't keep pretending that this little house and your mechanic job are enough anymore. My friends at school, they have real families with real success stories. Their parents are doctors and lawyers and business owners who can help them build careers. What can you offer me except embarrassment?" Marcus felt as if she had slapped him across the face, but he kept his voice steady and gentle. "I offered you love, Sarah. I gave you a home when you had nowhere else to go. I worked every extra hour I could to support your dreams." Sarah stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair in her haste to leave the room. "Don't make me feel guilty for wanting more than this," she snapped. "Maybe if you had done more with your own life, you would understand ambition. But you're just a mechanic who adopted a kid to make himself feel important." She stormed out of the kitchen, leaving Marcus sitting alone at the table where they had shared thousands of meals and conversations over the years. The next morning, Sarah loaded her expensive suitcases into Bradley's car without asking Marcus for help, though he stood on the front porch, ready to carry her bags and offer his support. She gave him a quick, impersonal hug goodbye and said, "I'll call when I get settled," but her tone suggested it was just something she felt obligated to say. As Bradley's car disappeared down the street, Marcus walked back into Sarah's empty bedroom and sat on the bed where he used to read her bedtime stories. On the floor, forgotten in her rush to leave, was the stuffed rabbit she had carried the day she first came to live with him, the same rabbit that had comforted her through nightmares and lonely moments. Marcus picked it up and held it against his chest, remembering the frightened little girl who had become his whole world, and wondered if he would ever see that loving child again, or if she was lost forever beneath the layers of ambition and shame that had hardened around Sarah's heart like armor, protecting her from a past she now seemed determined to forget. 8 years had passed since Sarah left for Stanford, and the sound of expensive heels clicking on the front porch of Marcus's modest home announced her return, like the approach of a storm that had been building for nearly a decade. Marcus opened the door to find a woman he barely recognized, dressed in a sleek black business suit that probably cost more than he made in 2 months. Her hair professionally styled in a way that made her look older and harder than her 26 years. Behind her stood Bradley Henderson, now her fiancé, wearing a smug expression that matched his perfectly tailored clothes and gold watch that caught the afternoon sunlight. "Hello, Marcus," Sarah said coolly, not bothering to hug him or ask how he had been during the 3 years since her last brief visit home. "We need to talk. May we come in?" Marcus stepped aside, his heart already heavy with the formal tone in her voice, and watched as Sarah surveyed their small living room with the same critical eyes she might use to evaluate a property she was considering for demolition. The furniture was the same as when she had left for college, perhaps a bit more worn and faded, but Marcus had kept everything exactly as it was, hoping that someday his little girl might want to come home again. Bradley wrinkled his nose slightly at the smell of motor oil that always seemed to linger on Marcus's clothes, no matter how much he washed them, and chose to remain standing rather than sit on the old couch where Sarah had once curled up to watch movies with Marcus on Sunday afternoons. "I'll get straight to the point," Sarah announced, pulling out a leather folder that looked as expensive as everything else she owned. "Bradley and I are getting married in 6 months, and we need to make some practical decisions about our future. I've been thinking about your situation here, Marcus, and I believe it's time for you to consider moving to a senior living community where you can get proper care as you age." Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat, not because of her suggestion, but because of the cold, businesslike way she delivered it, as if she were discussing the relocation of an unwanted piece of furniture, rather than the man who had raised her with nothing but love and sacrifice. "I'm only 58, Sarah," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the pain building in his chest. "I'm not ready for a nursing home, and I'm certainly not ready to give up the house where we built our memories together." Sarah's expression didn't soften at his words. Instead, she opened her folder and pulled out several documents that she spread across the coffee table, like a lawyer presenting evidence in court. "These are property assessments and market analyses," she explained, her voice taking on the confident tone she probably used in business meetings. "This house is sitting on valuable land, and the neighborhood is about to be developed into upscale condominiums. If we sell now, we could get $200,000, maybe more. That money could pay for your care in a nice facility and help Bradley and I start our married life without financial stress." The word "we" in reference to selling his house made Marcus's hands tremble slightly, but he kept his voice calm as he asked, "What makes you think I want to sell the house where I raised you, Sarah? This is my home. These walls hold 20 years of our life together." Bradley stepped forward then, his voice dripping with condescension, as he said, "Look, Mr. Johnson, Sarah is trying to do what's best for everyone here. You're getting older, this house is falling apart, and frankly, it's not the kind of place where Sarah's husband should have to visit for family gatherings. We're talking about moving you somewhere appropriate for someone of your background." The way Bradley said background made it clear he was referring to more than just Marcus's age, and the insult hit its mark with surgical precision. Sarah didn't defend Marcus or correct her fiancé's rudeness. Instead, she nodded in agreement and added, "Bradley's right. We need to think practically about this. You worked hard your whole life, Marcus, and you deserve to rest now. Let us handle the adult decisions." Marcus looked at this young woman who had once promised to love him forever, who had worn his promise ring around her neck and called him daddy with such joy, and felt something break inside his heart that he knew would never heal completely. "Adult decisions," he repeated softly, more to himself than to them. "I see. And if I don't agree to this plan of yours?" Sarah's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of the entitled anger that had been building in her for years. "Then I think it would be best if we ended our relationship entirely," she said, her words falling like stones into the silence of the room. "I can't keep pretending that we come from the same world, Marcus. I have a reputation to maintain, a career to protect, and a future to build with Bradley. I can't do that while being dragged down by this." She gestured around the room with obvious distaste, encompassing not just the modest furniture and worn carpet, but everything that Marcus represented: his simple values, his working background, his unconditional love that apparently meant nothing to her now. Marcus stood up slowly, his joints aching from years of physical labor, and walked to the window where he could see the small garden where he had taught Sarah to plant tomatoes when she was 9 years old. "So this is an ultimatum," he said, his back still turned to them. "Sign over my home to you, or lose you forever." Sarah's voice was ice cold as she replied, "I prefer to think of it as a business proposition that benefits everyone involved. You have 1 week to decide, Marcus. I'll be staying at Bradley's parents' estate until then. When I come back next Saturday, I expect your answer." Marcus turned around to face them, and for a moment Sarah seemed to see something in his eyes that made her step back slightly, though she couldn't have said what it was. "I'll give you my answer," Marcus said, quietly, his voice carrying a weight that neither Sarah nor Bradley fully understood. "But I want you to be very sure this is what you want, Sarah. Because once certain words are spoken, once certain bridges are burned, there's no going back to the way things were." Sarah lifted her chin defiantly, the gesture so familiar from her childhood tantrums that Marcus felt another piece of his heart crack. "I'm sure," she said. "I've been sure for a long time. I just finally have the courage to do something about it." As they walked toward the door, Marcus called out, "Sarah?" She turned back, and for just a second, he thought he saw a flicker of the little girl she used to be. "That promise ring I gave you on your 8th birthday," he said. "Do you still have it?" Sarah's hand went unconsciously to her throat, where the ring had hung on its chain for so many years. But her neck was bare now, adorned instead with expensive jewelry that Bradley had given her. "I lost it somewhere," she lied, though they both knew she had deliberately thrown it away years ago, in a moment of anger and shame. Marcus nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he had suspected but hoped wasn't true. "I see," he said. "Well then, I guess we both know where we stand." After they left, Marcus sat alone in his quiet house, surrounded by 20 years of memories that apparently meant nothing to the woman who had once been his whole world, and began to consider possibilities that would change both of their lives forever, though Sarah would not understand the true cost of her ultimatum until it was far too late to take back the words that had finally severed the bond between a father's love and a daughter's ambition. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, matching the heavy feeling in Marcus's chest as he sat at his kitchen table with a steaming cup of coffee and a manila folder that contained documents Sarah had never seen. Documents that told a story she could never have imagined about the man she had dismissed as nothing more than a poor mechanic who had gotten lucky enough to adopt her. The sound of expensive car doors slamming in his driveway announced Sarah's return exactly 1 week after her ultimatum, and Marcus could hear her confident voice giving instructions to someone outside, probably the real estate agent she had brought to seal their deal, when Sarah walked through his front door without knocking, followed by Bradley and a sharp-dressed woman carrying a briefcase and tablet. Marcus didn't look up from his coffee cup, though his hands trembled slightly as he heard Sarah's heels clicking across the worn linoleum floor of the kitchen where they had shared thousands of meals together. "Well, Marcus," Sarah announced, her voice carrying the same cold confidence it had possessed the week before. "I assume you've had time to think about our proposition and come to the right decision." Marcus finally raised his eyes to meet hers, and something in his expression made Bradley shift uncomfortably, though the young man couldn't have explained why he suddenly felt like they were walking into a trap they didn't understand. I have indeed thought about it, Sarah, Marcus replied quietly, his voice so calm it was almost eerie. I've thought about a lot of things this past week, actually. About love, about sacrifice, about what it means to be family, and about what happens when someone forgets where they came from. Sarah rolled her eyes impatiently and gestured toward the real estate agent, a thin woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had been studying the house with calculating eyes. This is Mrs. Patterson, from Henderson Realty, Sarah said. Bradley's family owns the company, so we'll get the best possible price for the property. Rewritten story for voiceover. Just sign these documents, and we'll get you settled at Sunset Manor before the month ends. It's an excellent place, Marcus. Far better than struggling to keep this old house running alone. Marcus rose from his chair slowly, moving with purpose, and went to a kitchen drawer where he had carefully placed something the previous evening. Before we talk about my choice, he said, retrieving a set of keys that didn't belong to the house, there's something you need to see, Sarah. Something that rightfully belongs to you. The keys were small and silver, connected to a label reading Storage Unit 247. And when Marcus set them down in front of her, Sarah appeared puzzled for the first time since entering the house. What are these for? She inquired, her manner wavering as she realized things weren't going as planned. Everything that's truly yours is stored in that unit downtown, Marcus stated, his voice becoming more confident with every word. All your childhood items, school memories, dance outfits, awards. Every photo we shared, every birthday greeting you created for me. I used this week to pack everything because I understood that if I've been such a disappointment to you, if I've limited your progress, then you shouldn't need reminders of our years together. Sarah's lips moved without sound as she grasped what his actions meant. Bradley moved closer, his face reddening with fury as he saw that Marcus wasn't simply surrendering to their wishes. Hold on there, Bradley began, but Marcus raised his hand in a way that demanded quiet, despite his plain clothing and worn hands. I haven't completed my statement, Marcus declared, and something in his voice made even Mrs. Patterson stop her tablet work and listen. You desired this house, Sarah, and you'll receive it. I transferred ownership to you yesterday. He took out a paper from his manila folder and placed it next to the storage keys, and Sarah seized it with trembling fingers, hardly believing her strategy had succeeded. However, there's another matter you should understand. Marcus went on, observing Sarah examine the legal paper that made her the house's only owner. Something I should have shared years earlier, but I hoped you'd care for me, as I am, not for my possessions. Sarah's confusion grew as Marcus produced more papers from his folder, these appearing more formal and complex than anything she expected from her adoptive father. You see, Sarah, when you labeled me merely a mechanic last week, you were partially correct. I work as a mechanic and enjoy it, but I'm also Robert Johnson's son, who possessed 12,000 acres of farmland beyond the city before his death, 15 years ago, left everything to me. Sarah's color drained as she viewed the property. Documents and financial records Marcus displayed on the table, showing land transactions, mineral rights, and investment accounts totaling amounts beyond her comprehension. The development project you mentioned, Marcus said softly, those apartments being constructed nearby. I hold 60% ownership. That upscale facility you chose for me. I could purchase 3 without affecting my savings. Yet none of this mattered compared to being your father, to earning your affection through my character, not my wealth. Bradley gaped at the financial papers, while Mrs. Patterson abandoned any pretense of working, staring at Marcus as if he'd transformed into someone entirely different. But Sarah's response devastated Marcus's most, rather than showing guilt or sorrow. Her expression revealed calculating avarice as she grasped the money's magnitude. If you possess such wealth, she said slowly, her voice trembling but not with remorse, why did you watch me struggle financially through college? Why force me into part-time work and student loans when you could have covered everything? Marcus felt his heart shatter as he realized that even confronted with evidence of his devotion, Sarah could only focus on what she believed she'd missed. "Because I wanted you to understand effort's worth," he whispered. "Because I grew up privileged and careless, losing everything through my own foolishness, and I refused to let that happen to you. Because I believed earning your independence would build your character and appreciation, though I clearly see my failure now." Sarah jumped up suddenly, pressing the house deed against her chest protectively. "Well, it's irrelevant now," she stated coldly. "You've given me the property, and if you're as wealthy as these documents indicate, you certainly don't require it. Bradley and I will be quite content with our choice." Marcus nodded and went to his bedroom, returning with a single suitcase he'd prepared that morning. "Then nothing remains to discuss," he replied, walking toward the entrance of the house, where he'd planned to spend his remaining years with his daughter, visiting for celebrations and bringing grandchildren to enjoy the garden. Reaching the door, Sarah shouted, "Wait, Marcus." And momentarily, he hoped she'd finally understood, finally recognized what she was destroying. But when he turned, she held up a business card. "Mrs. Patterson recommended an excellent financial consultant," she said. "Someone to help you handle all that money correctly. You should contact him." Marcus looked at the woman he'd raised from a frightened 7-year-old into this cold stranger, and smiled sadly. "Farewell, Sarah," he said. "I hope you eventually discover what you're truly seeking, and when you do, it brings you the joy that loving you gave me." Walking away from the only home Sarah had known, carrying just a suitcase and 20 years of shattered hopes, Marcus heard her voice once more calling out, but she wasn't apologizing or asking him to return. She was asking if he'd left the financial consultant's contact information, where she could locate it. 6 months after Sarah watched Marcus leave their family home with only a suitcase, her ideal new life had collapsed like a structure built on weak foundation. Leaving her alone in the tiny apartment she could barely manage, surrounded by memory boxes she'd finally collected from storage unit 247. The extravagant wedding had consumed most money from the house sale, particularly after the repairs buyers had required, repairs Marcus had somehow known about, but never mentioned during their final meeting. Bradley had shown his real character just 2 weeks after their honeymoon, arriving home late, with makeup stains on his shirt and treating Sarah like nothing more than an attractive object he could use and abandon when bored. The prestigious marketing position had become a disaster of scheming co-workers and unrealistic expectations, where Sarah learned her Stanford education meant nothing without the relationships and family money her colleagues assumed everyone possessed. But the manila folder she discovered at the bottom of a storage container finally destroyed what remained of her world. A folder labeled Sarah's future in Marcus's neat writing, containing papers that exposed the true extent of what she'd sacrificed in her pursuit of a superior life. Inside were copies of investment accounts that had been set up in her name since she was 8 years old, accounts that Marcus had funded with quarterly deposits for over 15 years, building a trust fund that would have made her financially secure for the rest of her life. There were scholarship applications he had submitted on her behalf, letters of recommendation he had written pretending to be teachers and community leaders, and detailed plans for surprising her with the money on her wedding day, along with a note explaining that he had wanted her to marry for love, not financial security. The most devastating document was a copy of Marcus's will, dated just 3 months before their final confrontation, leaving everything to Sarah with a handwritten letter explaining that he had grown up wealthy and spoiled, had lost everything due to his arrogance and sense of entitlement, and had spent his adult life rebuilding his fortune while working as a mechanic to stay humble and connected to real people who valued honesty and hard work over money and status. The letter revealed that Marcus had hidden his wealth, not out of shame, but out of love, wanting Sarah to develop character and appreciate the value of earning respect through kindness and integrity, rather than through bank account balances and designer clothes. Sarah's hands shook as she read about the scholarship fund Marcus had established in her name at their local community college, providing dance lessons and college tuition for foster children who aged out of the system, and about the youth center he had been quietly funding for years, where he volunteered every weekend teaching mechanical skills to teenagers who reminded him of his younger self. With tears streaming down her face, Sarah realized that while she had been chasing wealth and status, Marcus had been using his money to help people, to make a real difference in the world, to honor the values he had tried so desperately to teach her during their years together. The address on the scholarship fund letterhead leads Sarah across town to a modest building with peeling paint and a hand-painted sign that read Second Chance Youth Center, where she found Marcus in the garage bay, wearing coveralls and teaching a group of teenage boys how to change the oil in an old Honda Civic. He looked older than she remembered, his hair grayer and his shoulders more stooped, but his smile was genuine as he patiently explained each step to the kids who hung on his every word with respect and admiration that Sarah had forgotten how to feel. When Marcus looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, his expression didn't change to anger or disappointment as she had expected. Instead, his eyes filled with the same love and concern she remembered from her childhood, when he would wait up for her after school plays and dance recitals with hot chocolate and questions about her day. "Hello, Sarah," he said quietly, wiping his hands on a shop rag while the teenagers looked curiously between them, sensing that something important was happening but not understanding what. "I heard about your divorce. Are you all right?" The simple kindness in his voice, the genuine concern for her well-being, despite everything she had put him through, broke something inside Sarah that had been frozen solid for years, and she collapsed onto her knees in the doorway, sobbing with a grief that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. "I'm so sorry, Daddy," she whispered, using the word she hadn't spoken in over a decade. "I'm so sorry for everything I said, everything I did, everything I threw away because I was too proud and stupid to see what was right in front of me." Marcus crossed the garage in 3 quick steps and knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms the same way he had when she was 7 years old and afraid of thunderstorms. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt truly safe and loved and home. "You're still my daughter," he said, his own voice thick with emotion as he held her tight. "You always have been and you always will be. No matter what mistakes you think you've made or how far apart we've been over the following months." Sarah slowly rebuilt her relationship with the man who had never stopped being her father, working beside him at the youth center and learning to find joy in helping others instead of climbing social ladders that led nowhere but loneliness and regret. She took a job teaching dance classes at the center, sharing her Stanford education and professional experience with kids who faced the same challenges she had overcome. Kids who needed someone to believe in them the way Marcus had believed in her when she was too broken to believe in herself. On the first anniversary of her return, Sarah stood beside Marcus at a community service ceremony where he was receiving an award for his years of quiet philanthropy and volunteer work. And when they called her name as his guest, she stood up proudly and said, "That's my dad," loud enough for everyone in the auditorium to hear. As they walked home together after the ceremony, past the house that had been sold and renovated beyond recognition, Sarah slipped her hand into Marcus's weathered palm and felt the weight of the promise ring he had bought for her birthday, the ring she now wore every day as a reminder that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars or possessions, but in the love we give and receive, the lives we touch, and the legacy we leave behind in the hearts of those who matter most.